Right, so I got the challenge to keep you awake right after lunch, talking about a very boring subject, which is science. Many of you probably are already practice sleeping through college and high school through science classes, so you know how that works. Today is I'm trying something different. I used to do, I go more onto the technical part of DNA and a lot of background, and then I realized that we never had time to talk about the real issues and the real questions. And so my goal today is to present to you 8 of what I think are the major statements that more recurring appear in posts or questions that people have or heard and regarding science and the Book of Mormon and things related to that issue in general. So I will present these statements. You might be familiar with some of them, and then I will talk a little bit about why we need to be careful about taking these things for face value for what they really mean. Now, biggest misconception when it comes to DNA is that people think it's a pretty straightforward thing. We use it in court settings. You know, you can take people out of prison or put them in prison. You can use it to prove if somebody is a child or somebody else, so they have to pay child support in case of a divorce. And so all these things are true. DNA is a super powerful tool which has become available in recent decades to allow people to resolve questions, even legal questions, criminal questions, that were not previously addressed or be able to find an answer just using the traditional approach. So it is accurate, it does work, but it also has its limitations. And we have always to understand what type of DNA we are talking about, because not all DNA is created equal, and what is the application or the question we're trying to answer. So today, I'm not here, and I hope it doesn't come across that way. You know, first of all, I wouldn't be involved with genetics and spend years studying it and working at it if I did not believe in it, okay? So I absolutely adore DNA, and I'm a big fan of it. I have all my children tested right at birth, during childbirth. And, that's a story you can ask my wife about. But everything that is alive, the first question I have, you know, is about what the genetics of that. And so I'm not here to say, and that's what some people are thinking, especially critics of the church, that the Mormons are afraid of science, or that we are afraid what science can tell us about our religion, about our faith, that might shake a little bit our foundation. That's absolutely not true. The church actually, even among church leaders and apostles, we had famous scientists, and even Brigham Young was was fond about science. In fact, he said that religion without science or science without religion could not exist. And so we think is another dimension and another tool that we have available. The Heavenly Father has given us to answer questions and expand our knowledge. I love the scriptures in Doctrine and Covenants that say, you know, we gain this truth by study and also by faith, almost as implying that study is almost more important than faith in receiving knowledge. You know, we put all our efforts in it using the available technology, then Heavenly Father will help us see how things work and confirm the truth. So, but it's not always so simple and so straightforward, and we need to understand the rules when we talk about that. Somebody before was talking about why if these things are so important, the church is not talking about or writing about it, and Scott Gordon mentioned a little bit about the gospel topics section. I don't think anyone has shown them where to find them yet. Have you? Where is Scott? Is he asleep already somewhere? Okay. And but I think some of you might be familiar, but there are in many languages. I'm sure there are in Swedish too. I haven't checked that, but you know, you go to the church homepage, under Scriptures and Studies, you have gospel topics right here. And when you click on it, then you have a number of essays on topics that we have discussed today. And one of the things that Elder Ballard say, and I work for SNI as well, like Louis does. And one of the things that Elder Ballard said in February to all the seminary and institute teachers is to notice gospel topics as the palm of our hand. Okay, so that's how much emphasis is the church put into it. The new seminaries and institute manuals are fully integrated with this. In fact, just to open a parenthesis, the new course, Foundations of the Restoration, which is available also in the manual section on LDS.org, which is a new mandatory institute class for the next 2 years, covers each one of these topics, like the Mountain Meadow Massacre, blacks in the priesthood. Even there is this essay on DNA in Book of Mormon. I don't know why would that be there, but it's there. And so I think the church is taking some very solid and audacious steps toward that. This is the essay on Book of Mormon DNA studies. I did help writing this one for the church. What I did and what they asked me to do was to write a much longer and comprehensive article, which has been published in the Interpreter. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this journal. Dan Peterson, where is it? Is it right here? Sleeping with God? Here it is. I was taking a nap with Scott. But Dan is the director and founder of the Interpreter. And it's a very good journal. Every Friday there are 2 new articles that are published on it, and it's open source, available to everyone. And so this was the original article I wrote for the church. And then from that article, they shrink it down and kind of change a little bit the language to make it easier to read, which became this essay right here. So you can go either way in all the references. So when it comes to DNA, I'll give you a little bit of background of DNA in Book of Mormon before we delve into these 8 points, and we have to do quite fast. We don't have that much time. But there are 3 components in DNA that are helpful to trace a person's history. Not only the individual person, but also populations. And this is what scientists use. Now, this is not medical genetics. This is pure, what I refer to almost as recreational genetics. This is the stuff, that doesn't save anybody's life, but it's cool to have that magazine when you go to the bathroom and you can read something fun, and that's what the stuff that they talk about it is this stuff right here. So we got 3 components mainly. One is the male Y chromosome. Every man in the world has a Y chromosome. That's what is needed in order to have the gender of a male. If you do not, the absence of Y chromosome results into a girl, into the offspring. So that's what is the key, the switch that makes it happen. Where do we get, as a male, where do we get our Y chromosome? Well, we get that from our father, who got it from his father, and so on and so forth for many generations. And so when we look at the Y chromosome, and we look at the changes on the Y chromosome and the information we get from it, we can study a person, individual, paternal ancestry. We know nothing about everybody else, just the paternal ancestry. Or we can study by looking at the Y chromosome of many people from the same population, where that population could have come from. Similarly, we have another tool, another genetic marker called the mitochondrial DNA. And the mitochondrial DNA comes from our mother. Is exclusively inherited from our mother. No one gets any mitochondrial DNA from their father. I'm not going to talk to you about what mitochondria and mitochondrial DNA do. You can go on Wikipedia or whatever and find some information. But what is important for this lecture, for this presentation, is that mitochondrial DNA provides genetic information into the history of the maternal line. So nothing about any other ancestor, just a straight shot in the maternal line. Likewise, it's used for personal genealogy or to study the migrations of people. Both of these studies, these markers, these tools have been used to study the genetics of population, including the origins of Native Americans. More recently, we have been able, and I say recently, we're talking about the last decades, we've been able to have a better grasp on autosomal DNA, which is the majority of a person's DNA. These are the 22 nuclear chromosomes that we have, the 23rd being the sex chromosomes. So over 3 billion pieces of DNA tied together make up the autosomal DNA. The nice things about autosomal DNA is that we inherited from all of our ancestors. The bad things about autosomal DNA is that we cannot link it to a specific ancestor, not like the Y chromosome on the paternal line or the mitochondrial DNA on the maternal line. So any one of our ancestors could have given us a piece of the autosomal DNA. Another bad thing about autosomal DNA is that we lose 50% of it at each generation. So when mom and dad gave their children their autosomal DNA, they gave only 50% of it in order to make 100%, and the other 50 is not passed on and is lost. So you can see that at the first generation, we have exactly 50% of DNA that goes to the child, but when we go back one more generation, we start looking into probabilities. Because on average, if we look at many grandparents and many grandchildren, on average, as we add all these, the autosomal DNA and we divide it by the number of individuals that we are observing, we come close to a 25% inheritance. So each child will have 25% autosomal DNA from the grandparents on average. But when you look at the individual specific cases, you can have as little as 0 and as much as 50% on one of the grandparents. And that's because it's inherited by chance, by randomness. They gave 50% each to your father, and then when your father gave you 50%, he can give you more from one of his parents and less from the other. Does that make sense? Okay, you're all smart people. That's where the Nobel Prize is, right? Stockholm. But we are in Gothenburg, so that doesn't count. And so as we go back, autosomal DNA becomes really diluted. And in genealogy, we actually can use it only for 5 or 6 generations, as that DNA eventually tend to disappear. We're going to look into that a little bit more as we go into the specifics of the Book of Mormon. What is the big deal with the DNA in the Book of Mormon? Well, a number of years ago, one particular individual and then others kind of followed him into this one. He wasn't a population geneticist. He was a geneticist, but he was studying plants. And he needed to find, in my opinion, a reason to leave the church. And so his reason was DNA. And so this is the part of the world that connects what is known as Siberia or Northeast Siberia to Alaska. And during the last ice age, there were major glaciers in pretty much all the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So the sea level was lower than it is today, and more land, more coastal lines were exposed, including this piece of land that was continental in size, which scientists refer to as Beringia, which is where we have the Bering Strait today. The environmental the environment has not changed very much in the area. We still experience strong winds and cold season, but what has changed was the world climate, the world temperatures, and so when these areas were covered with ice sheets, this whole area was exposed, making a natural bridge that connected the Asian continent to the Americas. And so what scientists have been able to find, and this is a theory that went back many hundreds of years, but in this century, scientists have been able to find many archaeological sites on both sides that shows the presence of humans there as far back as about 30,000 years ago here, and as about 18,000, 20,000 years ago on this hand. They also found these are the Aleutians Island, and at one point they were all connected based on during the last ice age, and they even found today mammoths remain on each one of these islands. So there was continuity of land that allowed these migrations, because mammoths, like elephants, I don't think they would go for a bath in the ocean and swim to the next island. So what scientists have been saying is that the American continent has been peopled from migrants that would come hunter-gatherers. We're talking about Homo sapiens that were looking for food and eventually pushed themselves as north as this area. And then the Beringia never froze. It was never covered with ice. Because of the strong winds in this area, it did not allow for snow to settle and then to build up and create glaciers. But what it created were natural barriers on either side, and so whoever humans came there became a population isolate, meaning they could survive, they could probably multiply to some degree. I don't think there were many resources available in the area, but they could not back to the original population and remix with them, okay? So over time, we experience genetic mutation randomly. The estimate is that every time we have a child, the child has about 70 bases of DNA out of those 3 billion that I was telling you about that the parents did not have. Those are called a random mutation, just in making the copies of DNA. And this is demonstrated because we can now sequence complete genomes of parents and children and compare every single base. And on average, we have about 70 differences. So you can see that over a period of thousands of years, when these humans were trapped there, they developed their own genetic characteristics. And as the climate began to improve, they start moving into the northern part of North America, and there was archaeologically there not any human presence there before about 18,000 years ago. So it matches with the time of the last ice age, and it matches the archaeological sites, as you can see from this other slide. They've been studying. This was published in 2014. They've been studying autosomal DNA. That's what the G stands for. Y chromosome. That's a Y. Mitochondrial DNA and archaeological data, and they all match the theory. Of course, there is no archaeological data in the Beringia Strait because it's all underwater, right? And so someday maybe we'll have the technology to go and see what's left down there. But what we find is all archaeological data over in this. And so we see humans' presence about this time here, and then we start seeing human presence around here about that time. And it's estimated that there were 2 major migrations, one a coastal migration, and then one probably that took place inside the land. And there were 2 major glaciers. And the ecology, if you look at you can study the history of the world looking also at plants, pollen, and you can study when things were growing and when they were like frozen in time. And so right here, there is like, in the middle, there is a sign that there was like an ice-free corridor, which allowed people to also move inland. That has some implication with the Book of Mormon because there is a theory, one of the geographic models that claims that maybe Lehi and Nephi landed and settled in this area, and we will address that briefly today. But also genetically, it shows that they might have come here not because of Lehi or Nephi, but because they came through to this corridor. This is the Kennewick Man. How many of you have heard of the Kennewick Man? Okay, he's probably the most famous Native American guy. And we'll talk a little bit about him, but that's the location where he's been found. Okay, so what are the 2 arguments using DNA in the Book of Mormon? The first argument is against the Book of Mormon, and they say because of what I showed to you, that people came from Asia, and the DNA of Native American is indeed similar to that of Asians and not that of people from Israel, then the Book of Mormon must be a product of the 19th century and not an historical book. So that's the claim against the Book of Mormon using DNA. People that claims instead that the DNA is showing the Book of Mormon to be truth are the ones that are saying, well, there is a genetic marker found in the Great Lakes area that I showed you before, and that marker is from the Middle East, and the only reason we can explain that in the Great Lakes area is that there was a migration from the Middle East there, and therefore the Book of Mormon is true. I hope that we live today knowing that we have to be very careful at accepting either one of these theories, okay? I personally don't buy into any of them based on what we know from population genetics. So let's start with these points. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll go through them fairly quick. First of all, the first claim that you hear is that the absence of Israelite DNA is evidence that the Book of Mormon is not historical. I always like to say to people that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, you know. So first of all, you know, wait about throwing away your membership because you haven't found the right DNA yet, you know. There will be pretty silly things if then eventually that is found. But I can show you that this is probably not going to be the case, as DNA is not probably the best tool to address this question. So, first question, is there indeed any Old World DNAs in America, or is all Asian? So this is an example of a paper. You don't need to read all of that, but what I want to point to you is that it's very simple. It's like, this is based on Y chromosome, okay? And so they say we found two types of Y chromosome among Native Americans, C and Q, which shows the presence of Native Americans, right? So this is a typical Y chromosome from Native Americans. But we also found this R lineage, and it's present in Native American tribes. So they found C and Q, which is expected, but they also found R, right? And it's like, most likely it's there because it came from recent European admixtures. Now, this is a scientific journal published in a scientific article published in a very respected scientific journal. It went through peer review process, so other scientists are able to read this one before it was published to see if it was good science or not. And they use languages like most likely, okay? So you see that, what does that mean? It's like, we're not sure, but that is probably the best answer to it. And what is the best answer? Is that every time that Old World DNA is found in the Americas among natives, the default answer is, well, probably came after 1492, okay? Why they're saying that? Well, simple question, a simple answer, I mean, is the molecular clock or the capabilities to time genetic variation over time is not as precise as to be able to discern DNA that came after 1492 from DNA that came before 1492, okay? In fact, when it comes to the mitochondrial DNA, scientists estimate, and current science, this is what the consensus among scientists, and that's what I use as well, is one mutation every 5,000 years, right? So when did the Europeans arrive? About 500 years ago. Where does the Book of Mormon say that Lehi and his family came? About 2,600 ago. So they're all within 5,000 years, right? And so the tool is helpful and is calibrated, and it can help to identify older migrations, the one I was telling you about from the Bering Strait, where there was enough time to differentiate it from their Asian counterparts, but it's not sensitive enough to measure anything that happened in between unless you can find a burial site and you can test exactly that fossil's DNA. Then in that case, you know exactly what you're looking at, and you can compare the ancient DNA to modern DNA and see where it matches. And so, you know, one solution to this question is, let's find Lehi's tomb, right? Let's find Lehi's tomb, and once we have it, we can test Lehi's DNA. But unless we find that, you know, we're missing a very important key component in this equation. So, based on the fact that the DNA is found, Old World DNA is found in Americas, but we can't answer the question if it came before or after the latest migration of Europeans, my conviction is that the DNA is probably a weak tool to address the question of Book of Mormon historicity. So I will be very, very wary about anyone that will make you think otherwise. So I'm not dismissing DNA altogether. There are, again, instances in which it's very helpful, but I don't think that it can answer this specific question. And we have to ask ourselves the same question. Would DNA be a sufficient tool to demonstrate the existence of the Savior, or Heavenly Father, or Abraham, or Adam and Eve? Can we use that? And then because we cannot use it, are we dismissing them as well? What I'm saying here is that there are cases in which you can use it, and this is not one of them. Second instance, the Book of Mormon tells us the history of American Indians. This is also not true. The Book of Mormon is an historical book, not a book of history. It contains spiritual matters of a specific group of people. It is mostly a family or people book. It is not a continental book telling the history of all Americas. This is North and South America taking a nap, and you probably never saw a picture of that this way, but the reason I put it this way is to help you understand what we're dealing here with. So there are more than 15,000 kilometers between southern Chile and Alaska. This distance is about 1/3 greater than the distance between Portugal and Japan. Okay? And so we're expecting that the Book of Mormon, sometimes as we don't read it carefully, will tell us a story of all the Native Americans living everywhere between here, the Eskimos and the Mapuche, down in Chile and so on. It doesn't. Okay? In fact, we don't even hear about the very people that are in the Book of Mormon, like the Lamanites, until they don't show up for war. And when they're gone for a number of years in peace, we don't know what they're doing, right? Because the Book of Mormon writers are not close enough to them to know that. So the Book of Mormon only tells a very limited history of a limited geography, of a limited group of people that are directly in contact with the writer. It is not a book of history. If I want to study the history of Native American, there are better sources than the Book of Mormon. Going back to what I was saying about genetics and genealogy, there is a substantial difference between genetically related to our ancestors and genealogically related to our ancestors. If we go back 10 generations in time, I would have 1,024 ancestors, okay, just me. I need each one of them to exist for me to be here today. If only one of them did not show up that night, got drunk with his friends, or the wife had a headache or something, I wouldn't be here today, okay? I wouldn't be here today. So it takes, it's magic to me that it took that many people and everyone has to do their thing when they did it for me to be here. And only one of them could have changed that. But on the other hand, of these 1,000 people, I cannot possibly have the DNA from all of them because it doesn't add up. And so when we look at it, only about 10%, 12% of them have given me their DNA. So genetically, which DNA is what keeps me alive, I could be without 90% of this ancestor and I would be just fine. And yet genealogically, if only one of them was missing, I wouldn't be here. Does that make any sense to you? No? Okay. Then think about it, pray about it, and come back to me. So what it means is that you can still have genealogically all these individuals, but only a very small part of them will have given you DNA and will show a connection between you and them. That doesn't mean the other ones didn't exist. They needed to exist, but you don't have any genetic proof of them existing. Why am I saying that to you? Because a lot of people use it as a criticism the introduction of the Book of Mormon, which has changed in the recent years. It used to read that after thousands of years all were destroyed, talking about the Nephites and the Lamanites, except the Lamanites, and they are among the ancestors of the American Indians. It used to say are the principal ancestors, and then it was changed, says among the ancestors. Now, in both cases, principal and among, it implies that there were other people. Okay, the Nephites and Lamanites were not the only one in the Americas. And the other thing is that this introduction was added in 1981, so it's not part of the original Book of Mormon text, but was something added when the new triple combination was put together and as an introduction to the book. So it's not part of the old records. So there could have been other things that we have said or somebody said that might not be entirely true with regard to the text or what we understand the text. This is the best they knew in 1981, and then it was changed as to diminish that. But what the point is, and if you read my other articles, you will get that better, is that Lehi, based on the number of years that have passed between current Native Americans living today and his time, he could be every Native American ancestor, even if none of them would have his DNA. It's just a mathematical equation. If I have 1,000 ancestors 10 generations ago, that's about 250 years ago, how many ancestors would you have 2,600 years ago? Do the math. You need to do 2,600 divided 25, which is the number of years on average per generation, and then you take that number and you take the number 2 and you elevate it to that number, to that power. And it's a number too big to say. What's they call it? What's the word? Non-billion? Dan Peterson, you're the smart guy here. Have you heard of that? Is a 1 followed by 30 zeros. That's what it is. Okay? That's how many ancestors each Native American would have had 2,600 years ago. Every single one of them. Same with us, same with you. So you're going back in a time where you would have these people, but you could still not have any DNA to support that they ever existed. Another question is, when Lehi, another statement, when Lehi and his family arrived in America, no one else was here. That's also debatable. Although some church leaders might have said that, there are others that say otherwise. And the fact is, we don't really know, but we can think about it. Science says that there are, but the Book of Mormon, if you start reading the Book of Mormon, thinking that Lehi came in a place that there were other people, you're going to start finding some pretty strong evidence about it. How many people were in Lehi's group? Okay, there was Lehi's family and him and his wife and his kids. There was Ishmael, didn't come, but his wife did. Ishmael died in the old world, and his kids and their kids, and then you have Zoram. That's pretty much as many as we know that were in that group. And so, maybe 30, maybe 50 people, okay? But science said that there were millions of people here. Okay, so what would be the impact, the genetic impact of 50 people coming and mixing with that many individuals? Would you find their DNA today? And the answer is no. There is any population geneticist will tell you that it will not make a strong impact. It will actually be assimilated and dissolved very quickly. But there are other instances here in the scriptures that help us understand that. So one of the criticisms is, well, the Lord says that the land was going to be kept and preserved only for these people. But you can still preserve a land if somebody comes to it and it doesn't go back to tell others, right? So as long as you have people coming and then don't go back, this prophecy can still be fulfilled. Then there are these scriptures, 2 Nephi 5:6. When Nephi felt his life was in danger because of his brothers, he took his family and all others that wanted to follow him, and they left. So if everybody that he came with was his family, because even Zoram ended up marrying one of the children of Ishmael, or the daughter of Ishmael, so they're all family. So who are these others that follow Nephi? Okay, my friend Kito, which I think is here too, It's translated. Where is Kiddo? It's gone? Okay, here you are. So this week we were talking about that, as Alma makes a specific reference to writing in his own language. Why does he have to make that specification if everybody speaks his language? Why does he have to be said that? The best one probably is in Jacob 7. Jacob is first generation family that he was born in the old world. So I don't know about the time he writes this chapter, how many people from his group are there, maybe 100, individuals. And he writes this in Jacob 7. This is when Shem, the Antichrist, comes to him. And Shem, verse 4, was learned that he had a perfect knowledge of the language of the people. Why is it necessary to make mention of him knowing the language of the people? If we think that Lehi is the only group that came, everybody will speak the same language, right? So why is it important that? Wherefore he could use flattery, power, and speech according to the power of the devil. And then verse 6 is saying, it came to pass that he came unto me, and on this wise did he speak unto me, saying, Brother Jacob, I have sought much opportunity that I might speak unto you. Now, if he's some sort of nephew or cousin, and they're all one group, how long would it take to meet Jacob, right? So it sounds to me that is somebody coming from the outside. And then it says, For I have heard and also know that thou goest about much preaching that which he called the gospel of the doctrine of Christ. Sounds to me that there was missionary work going on. And, it can be read in different ways, but, wherever you had the fullness of the gospel, you usually have missionary work, and you would teach that to everyone, no matter who they are, and as long as they accept that and the covenant, then they're part of your group, and then you can mix with them and so on. Laman and Lemuel did not have that issue. They just went and mixed immediately. So what about when prophets or apostles or other leaders say that there were no other people? Well, everyone is entitled to their own theories, but in my mind, what we need to do is to go and say and look at what the text says. And this is a quote from an article that I'm writing. I promise I'm not going to cite myself very much today, but I like, I think it's pretty clear. I say, thanks to science, we cannot deny the existence of perhaps millions of people in the Western Hemisphere prior to the potential arrival of Book of Mormon migrants. And this must be taken into consideration as we read and interpret the Nephites' record, regardless of what anyone has said in the past regarding the contribution of Lehi's party toward the peopling of the Americas. Okay, and if we need to, science is showing that too, archaeology is showing that, so we need to read the Book of Mormon in that context. And if that context, you'll understand that that DNA, the contribution to the gene pool of the America from Lehi and his family would have not made any impact. Another statement is this one is, if scientists can obtain DNA from 70,000 years old Neanderthals, surely they could find Israelite DNA in the Americas from 2,600 years ago. So why they're not finding that? Well, first of all, how was the Neanderthal DNA identified? The first Neanderthals have been identified long before we knew about DNA, or we knew how to do DNA testing on ancient bones. So how did they know that was Neanderthal? Did they find a business card and say, I'm a Neanderthal? So nice to meet you, I'm a Neanderthal. What did they know? They were skeletons that look different, anatomically different than us. They had characteristics that were different. And so when the DNA era came around and they have been able to test, and these new tests are pretty accurate, the new technology can get DNA that old, you're testing something that you already know what it is. Okay, you know it's a Neanderthal, you're looking at their DNA, and then you're comparing the DNA with modern humans. With Lehi, we cannot apply that concept because we don't know Lehi's body is. If we would have Lehi's body, yes, we could get DNA from him. And yes, we could compare that DNA with modern Native Americans and see if we find that in some groups or in others, or if he has survived. But even in the case he would have survived in the modern population, which I don't think he did. But we're talking about two different things. It's not a problem with technology, it's a problem with sampling. Okay, it's where we are going to get those people. Look at the Vikings. We talked about that earlier today. They've been in the Americas for 400 years, and we know that they were doing business with Native Americans. But has anybody done any study on the presence of Viking DNA among Native Americans? Has anybody done that? Why? Why it's not done? It could be there, right? But how do you recognize Viking DNA from before 1492, from after 1492? You can't, right? And so we do have Scandinavian DNA in the Americas today, but everybody would say it came probably after 1492. And there is further evidence of of a particular genetic exchange because we actually found Native American DNA in Iceland, and it's a line of Native Americans that does not exist in America anymore. So it's like, okay, so how do you know it's Native American if it's in Iceland and not in the Americas? It's because the closest relatives, not identical, but the closest relatives to the DNA found in Iceland is found in the Americas. So it disappeared in America, or is not yet been found, because DNA can disappear, but he has survived in the Icelandic population. And what we think is probably is a mitochondrial DNA, so probably some females that were taken by the Vikings back to Iceland. And Vikings would never do something like that. Another statement that says DNA cannot just disappear. So you Mormon scientists, apologists are just hiding the evidence or denying the obvious. You're kind of copying out by saying that DNA does disappear. But if it was there in the first place, it needs to be there today. And it's not the case. Every population geneticist will tell you that. When I taught biology in college, the very first things when it came to population to evolution and population genetics was how DNA changes and disappear over time. This is a principle called genetic drift. I don't have time to talk a lot about it, but it's in the articles. Even in the gospel topic articles, it talks about that. But sometimes something happens, and a lot of the variation of different types of DNA that existed before do not make the event. And so once the things start being normal again, and people start expanding again, populations start expanding again, the DNA you find in a newer population will only represent the survival, not everyone before the catastrophic event. So what happened in the Americas? You had the distractions, the war between the Lamanites and the Nephites. Who knows how much of that DNA disappeared? You had the distractions of Christ coming. Who knows how much of that DNA disappeared? You had the impact of the Europeans, disease, slavery, warfare. Entire populations that have been wiped out, entire tribes. It wasn't a random selection where, in every village we kill 90 people and we make sure that 10 survive to propagate the DNA of that tribe. It wasn't like that. They just came and they wipe everyone out. So the entire population that have been destroyed. So the genetic variation today in Native Americans does not represent that happened before this bottlenecks event. That's how we call them. And so the genetic variation only represents survival. And this I'm going to let you read in Gospel Topics. I think this picture is actually there as well. I want to talk about these two cases. So one was a C1e, which is the line found in Iceland, but not in the Americas. And you have lines called C1b, C1c, and C1d in the Americas. So they are closely related, and you only find C1e in Iceland. And so we think that it has disappeared in America, but it has survived there thanks to the Vikings. And then a recent study, I was talking with Brian before about this one. This is from this year. Mummies, pre-Columbian mummies in South America, in the Peru area, 95 of them. They look at their DNA, and none of their DNA is found in today's population. Okay? This is not European DNA. Don't get too excited. It's not Nephite or Israelite DNA. but it is Native American DNA that is not there today anymore. So DNA does disappear. Lineages disappear. And that happens even when you have equal chances of propagating that DNA. Lehi did not have an equal chance. Having a small group into a large population, his chances were close to zero. We know what Israelite DNA looks like, so we should be able to find it in America. Really? And I always ask the question, what does Israelite DNA look like? And then people go quiet, okay? You can't really say that there is a DNA that is only found within the boundary of Israel or Palestine. There is this citation. A lot of people usually don't understand what it means. In fact, when I heard it the first time, it blew my mind away. So there are more differences within a population than between populations. Let me show you what it means with that. So this is Palestine right there, okay? This is Israel. This is mitochondrial DNA variation. So do you only see one type of DNA there? Do you see one type of DNA there? Answer the question. No, okay. I'm not trying to give you the answer. I want to hear from you, right? You don't have to listen to me. There are many types of DNA there, but what you see is the presence of one more than others, right? So it's the percentages that change, not necessarily the uniqueness. In fact, if I look at DNA of other countries, what do you observe? Do you find the same type of DNA in the surrounding countries and even not so close? Do you find the red DNA called haplogroup H in Africa? Yes or no? Yes. Do you find it in Europe? Yes or no? Okay, what is the difference between Africa and Israel? Is the amount, okay? So there is more differences within a population, okay? You see more variation within the people of the same country or the same population than you see when you compare two populations, because you find the same DNA in other populations. What it changes is the percentage. And so when we say Israelite DNA or Italian DNA, what we are referring to is perhaps the most common DNA, not the only DNA found there. So if I want to say what would be the typical Western European mitochondrial DNA, what would you say? Very good. And who say H? Did you take genetics? Do you have a PhD in genetics? How did you get the answer? Exactly. Okay, it's that simple, right? And so people would say, well, a typical European haplogroup is H. So should I expect every European to be an H? Would Lehi be from the most typical or the most frequent DNA or from one of the rare ones? You know, we don't know. And I don't think the Lord went to him and said, you are the best genetic representative of Israel, so you are being selected to go to the America and start a group of people right there. I don't think that's how it works, okay? And if any of you does, talk to your bishop. But worthiness does not come from DNA, okay? Is the DNA from Israelites 2,600 years ago in Israel the same DNA found today in Israel? It's a simple question to answer, right? I mean, we had the Babylonian captivity, we have the diaspora. So what DNA do we have today in Israel? We have New York DNA and Russian DNA and London DNA, right? Okay, I'm almost done with it. So what did Lehi DNA look like so that we can identify that? And would you ever take seriously in a legal setting, in a court, you have a crime, somebody dies, and you don't have the DNA of the criminal, but you have a person dead, can you accuse anybody based on the genetic evidence? You can't, because you don't have the DNA of the criminal, of the perpetrator. So we don't have the DNA of Lehi. That is a big issue. This is not a population genetics problem. This is a genealogical problem. We are looking at a family. We are not looking at half of the Israelite population coming here, bringing all the genetic variation of Israel into the America. We look at one family that we don't know anything about genetically. This is important. It has to do with one of the questions. There is DNA in the America supporting the Book of Mormon, and it's about this haplogroup X. Some of you make the name of Rod Meldrum. He's the guy behind it's called the Heartland model, the Great Lakes Book of Mormon setting in the North America. And he claims that this DNA found in North America is proof, this X2A, that the Israelites came to the Americas. The reality is that the one found in the Americas is different than the one found in the Middle East. They are related to each other, but this particular one has never been found here, to make the story simple. Scientists still don't know exactly how it got there, but what we know is that most likely it came this way as well, because the Kennewick man I was telling you before is carbon dated to 8,500 years ago, so before Book of Mormon times, and he has haplogroup X, and it's the same one found here. In fact, his line is ancestral, meaning it's older than the one found today in the Americas. So his presence is confirmed both by carbon dating, by where you found it, which is along the path, and by the fact that the genetic mutations are older than the one found in modern populations. So that pretty much knocks out, definitely in my mind, and I have one of my first papers in science was on Native American haplogroup X, so I can guarantee you that there is no one out there that has published more on this particular mitochondrial DNA than I did. But this is pretty much very strong evidence that if Rod Meldrum think that this theory is valid, that Book of Mormon took place in North America, then he should rely on other type of evidence. I'm not trying to say he's wrong on all the accounts. Everyone is entitled to have their opinion, but he should not use genetic as evidence. And the last point is that the church is, because I told you, I was talking a lot about 8,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago humans, and so some people here might say, hey, wait a second, the earth is 6,000 years old, right? Adam and Eve, 6,000 years. So what is this guy talking about? How does he have a temple recommend? I'm a bishop too. So, full apostasy in Rome. That's why we're not getting a temple. So, because we believe this kind of stuff. But, and I want to conclude on this one, is does the church really teach that there were no humans before 6,000 years ago? Does the church teaches that? Is that the official position of the church? What is the official church position on origins of man and evolution? This is a 1910 statement by the first presidency. And what it says here is whether the mortal bodies of man evolved in natural processes to the present perfection through the direction and power of God, whether the first parents of our generation, Adam and Eve, were transplanted from another sphere with immortal tabernacles, which became corrupted through sin and the particular natural food in the process of time, or whether they were born here in mortality, as other mortals have been, are questions not fully answered in the revealed Word of God. So they're saying, we don't know if they evolved, we don't know if they were transplanted, we don't know if they were born here. So they're leaving all the options open, right? This is a 2016 New Era statement. 2016, the New Era is the youth magazine, so that's what the church is teaching our youth in America. No wonder they get it Donald Trump. But, so, I don't want to get there. That's why I live in Italy and not in the United States anymore. But, what does the church believe about dinosaurs? Did dinosaurs live and die on this earth long before man came along? There have been no revelation on this question, and the scientific evidence says yes. So the church says that's the best we know right now is what science says. So you can actually learn about these things in the church or in schools like BYU. The details of what happened on this planet before Adam and Eve aren't a huge doctrinal concern of ours. The accounts of the creation in the scriptures are not meant to provide a literal, scientific explanation of the specific processes, time periods, or events involved. Okay, this is the church official position on evolution, on creation, on pre-Adamites. And then if you want to talk about, so how do we fit Adam into all that, you can write to me, we can talk about it, I can point you to other sources, but there is a lot more that could be said, but just relax and know that it is possible that there were people like science say many years ago. So thank you for your patience. What I want you to take home is if anybody would tell you that DNA prove or disprove the Book of Mormon, just be wary of that individual. They probably don't know what they're talking about. Thank you. How do you explain no death before the fall of Adam? It means we need to understand what do we mean with death. What kind of death are we talking about? If anybody can give me an answer, then I want the references to that. The Book of Mormon states that it is written for the Lamanites to bring them back to Christ, and also the Lamanites shall be white again if they become righteous. How can it be written for them if we don't know where they are? I think it's very clear. The question that we need to answer is not this one, is what is a Lamanite? What is a Lamanite? And what does 425 talks about Lamanites? What does it say about them? Who are the Lamanites in 425? Is it a racial thing? Is it a biological thing? What is it? Is anyone that do not accept Jesus Christ, right? The unbelievers were Lamanites. So when the saints received the Book of Mormon, the church started, and they went on a mission to the Lamanites. Did the Lamanites have a knowledge of Christ? Or any Native Americans, if you want to use, did they have a knowledge of Christ? No, and so they were teaching them Christ again, But in my mind, a Lamanite is now a cultural or social name, not a biological one. How can you have no Lamanites, no Hites in 425, and then you start having Lamanites again? Are they popping out the ground like mushrooms? No, it's a simple, a matter of belief. Just like we would say Gentiles, right? Are we from the house of Israel? Are we? As Latter-day Saints? Prove it to me genetically that you are. Okay? Are Gentiles not the house of Israel because of DNA? And what happened when they get baptized? So I think Lamanites is kind of used in the same context. I don't try to be, smart mouth here, but that's, really, really what I believe what Lamanites means. And so it can fit that if you think about anyone that does unbelievers. Do you acknowledge that LDS prophets from Joseph Smith to Spencer W. Kimball thought that today Indians were the Lamanites? They did teach that, and again, I don't know on what basis they say that. I don't know if they were speaking for God or if they were speaking for themselves, or that was the best knowledge that they had at that time based on their own understanding of the Book of Mormon. But, we don't have an official position of the church on the geography of the Book of Mormon. We don't know where those people were, and if the church has not revealed that specifically, then I would take anything else saying about Polynesian and Lamanites not to be intended as a biological things. And again, could they be descendants of Laman and Lemuel and Nephi genealogically and not have their DNA? So the statement could still be true, right? If they had them as an ancestor, although you cannot prove that genetically, you will still be considered one of them. Let me share a little experience. I went to a symposium last week in Utah, and was about the voice of Native Americans. So what did Native Americans think about themselves? We're always kind of hearing the white version, okay? But what do they say about themselves? And a big issue nowadays is that a lot of people would come, you would tell them, it's like, hey, I'm Native American, I'm a Navajo, And the white guy would say, oh, really, how much? How much are you Navajo? Okay? And they're like, what do you mean with that, how much? I live like a Navajo, I speak Navajo, I identify myself as a Navajo. What does it mean, how much, right? Because the white man will decide that or judge that based on percentage of biological connection. If your grandfather was a Navajo and your other 3 grandparents were not, then we would say you are 25% Navajo, right? Or 10% Navajo, 5% Navajo. Can somebody be Navajo and only be 5% Navajo biologically? Well, they would believe yes. They would believe yes. And so, when it comes to identify groups of people and tell them about something, what do they think about themselves? And is it genealogical, is it cultural, is it social, or is it genetic? In Chile, members say that President Kimpo said that Lehi and Nephi came to the Americas to Chile near, I don't know. What evidence did he have? I don't know. If we say that, then we would have a church official position on it. But we don't. So if the church is saying that we don't have a position on the landing of Nephi family, then even if President Kimball said that and he was a prophet, and that church is not embracing that as a doctrine, that means they probably wasn't speaking as a prophet. And there was not an official doctrine or statement made that we should embrace as a church. And we should learn, and maybe, Lois, you need to be a better job in teaching the people in Sweden what is doctrine and what is not doctrine, right?
Come here often.
But do we all agree that not everything that the prophets say is a fundamental doctrine? Do we all agree on that, or do we have problems? If you have problems, talk to him.
Last question.
Did humans live on the earth before Adam and Eve? Well, Michelangelo put a belly button on Adam when he did the Sistine Chapel, so ask him.